Welcome to Dreadful Dissections, which is, apparently, where you want me to take some lumbering pop culture monster that's been shambling around for decades and finally pin it to the table and examine its stomach contents. Instead of just saying this were all fields when I was growing up, we actually gut the thing, weigh the organs, and see what's really going on. And today, we're going to start with the most obvious one of all. Hello, lovelies. The Big D, the sacred cow, the brand that launched 1,000 tedious and unsympathetic think pieces, and that your line manager now knows about because of Stranger Things. The game with worse edition wars than a forgery dispute at an antique book fair. We're conducting an autopsy on Dungeons & Dragons. D&D has been a lot of things. Game, cartoon, action figure line, film, sort of, game again, computer game, sex toy, different cartoon, slightly better film, guest star in E.T. and just about any slightly nerdy series or film you care to mention, game again, lifestyle brand, Crocs, novels, game, and game again. But it's really all about the Crocs. The game. Confession, before the Inquisition starts sharpening its D20s, I didn't begin my gaming life with D&D, as any fool know. Like a lot of people of my generation in the UK, I crashed into tabletop gaming via other means first, and only later got dragged into the D&D gravity well, which means that I don't have that first crush glow or inconvenient adolescent boner brain rot about any specific edition. I have a sort of polite, long-term, it's complicated relationship with the entire D&D bloodline. It also means that if you've spent 30 years emotionally invested in one particular printing of the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide, you're going to find something here you disagree with or that you consider wrong. That's fine. I mean, you're still wrong and I'm still right, obviously, unless I get a fact egregiously wrong, but it is a fine line. With that out of the way, let's follow the chalk outline back to the basement where this whole thing started. D&D doesn't just appear fully formed like Athena springing forth from Zeus's brow. It kind of oozes out of existing war games. On the one side you have Gary Gygax in Lake Geneva working on Chainmail, a medieval miniatures rules set that includes a short fantasy supplement so that your knights can fight wizards, dragons and the rest instead of just stabbing each other over fiefdom boundaries. On the other side is Dave Arneson, running his Blackmore campaign out of the Twin Cities, heavily influenced by earlier Braunstein games, where players each took on individual roles in a wargame scenario, rather than commanding whole armies. Arneson grabs Gygax's chainmail fantasy rules, drops them into his Blackmore game, and starts doing something new. Instead of you controlling a regiment of anonymous pikemen, you're controlling one poor bastard who has to go into a dungeon and try not to die. This is the conceptual jump from wargame to role-playing game. For wilderness encounters, the early rules even leaned on another game entirely. OD&D literally tells you to use the map from Avalon Hill's outdoor survival board game for overland exploration. The result, published in 1974 by a tiny company called TSR, is the original Dungeons & Dragons boxed set. 3 digest-sized booklets in a box crediting both Gygax and Arneson. It's less of a finished product and more campaign notes that escaped Gary's basement, but that's where the whole empire begins. The 1974 original edition later dubbed OD&D, is the raw stuff, the uncut product. 3 slim books: Men and Magic, Monsters and Treasure, and Underworld and Wilderness Adventures. It assumes you already know how to wargame, already own chainmail, and are entirely comfortable with making up whatever the rules don't explicitly cover. Well, which is fine when you're designing things, typically, but not what people are used to when it comes to games that they've purchased. But people loved it anyway, because for the first time there was a published framework for running an ongoing fantasy campaign, embodying your hero. Not a war, a campaign. The same heroes, the same setting, evolving over time. It was messy, contradictory, half-baked, but it invited you to fill in the gaps, which was still pretty revolutionary in 1974. People bounced off it for exactly the same reasons. The organisation is chaotic, cross-referencing is minimal, and it presumes you'll happily decipher Gary and Dave's home games like it's the Dead Sea Scrolls, which isn't true of that many people. To a modern player raised on glossy full-colour hardbacks, YouTube explainers, etc., OD&D reads like getting IT support via haiku. It was very much a case of master and apprentice for getting the game learned by people. By 1977, which was important for other pop cultural reasons that escape my mind for the moment, TSR is trying to tidy things up and make the game a bit more accessible. Unfortunately, their idea of tidy is to split the product line into 2. First, you get the Dungeons & Dragons basic set, edited by Holmes, and this 1977 box is meant as a gateway drug. It covers levels 1 to 3 and is based on the original D&D rules cleaned up for new players. Holmes Basic was loved because it was finally something that a novice could read without needing a wargaming background, a slide rule, and a lot of patience. For a lot of people, especially outside the hardcore miniatures scene, this was their first contact with D&D. It was also frustrating. After 3rd level, the text basically says, "Congratulations, now go buy something else." And depending on the printing, that something might be AD&D, rather than further basic material or something else entirely. People who were already eyeing the big hardbacks treated it as an unnecessary stepping stone, rather than a real game line in its own right. At roughly the same time, Gygax is hauling together OD&D, its supplements and a lot of house rules into AD&D, the classic 3-book hardback line of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Monster Manual, Player's Handbook, and Dungeon Master's Guide. AD&D First Edition was adored because it felt big, serious, and official. The DMG in particular reads like a mix of rulebook, manifesto, and a grumpy blog, and it codifies a huge amount of the shared language of fantasy gaming: beholders, mind flayers, gelatinous cubes, game concepts and terminology, though many of those were also inherited from wargames, but the whole thing is pretty much there. It was also a bit of an incoherent sprawl. Different subsystems for everything, descending AC, Baroque initiative rules, and a tone that often implied you were doing it wrong if you didn't run games exactly the way Gary liked to run them. The art swung between charmingly scruffy and your mate's older brother's sketchbook with way too many nude pictures in it. And there are cultural landmines like the original bare-chested succubus illustration that would come back to haunt them once the moral busybodies discovered the game. So by the early 80s you already have a split, a basic D&D line and an advanced one, both nominally the same game, but not actually fully compatible and competing with each other for attention. That confusion never really goes away. In 1981, TSR revises the basic line into what's now called BX, the Basic and Expert sets, edited by Moldvay, Basic, and Dave Zeb Cook, with Steve Marsh, Expert. Basic covers levels 1 to 3, Expert expands play to wilderness travel, sea journeys, and levels up to 14. Together they form a complete game with its own tone and assumptions, distinct from AD&D rather than just an onboarding ramp into it. People love BX because it's concise, clearly written, and actually teaches you how to play. The rules are just enough to scaffold your campaign without strangling it, and modules like Keep on the Borderlands became generation-defining intro adventures. The downside, at least in the eyes of some 80s gamers, is social. BX got tagged as the kids' D&D, while AD&D was the real game for serious and mature players. If you wanted planar travel, demigods and dense hardbacks, you eventually drifted into advanced. If you liked punchy dungeon crawls and wilderness hexes, you stayed here, and were quietly judged by people who thought Thaco was their personality. Then in 1983, TSR goes hard on the classic D&D line with the BECMI series, Basic, Expert, Companion, Master, Immortal, all revised and expanded under Frank Menzer. The 1983 Basic set, the famous red box with Larry Elmore's cover of a fighter facing down a dragon, is a tutorial product and a fantastic on-board for role-playing games as a whole. You get a solo choose your own adventure style booklet that holds your hand through creating a character and the basics of play, then a Dungeon Master's book with your first proper dungeon. Expert, Companion, Master and Immortal then carry you from scruffy low-level adventurer through domain rulership all the way to playing as literal gods. By 1991, most of that progression, up to level 36, gets folded into the Dungeons & Dragons Rules Cyclopedia, a single massive hardback compiling the BECMI rules. People loved BECMI because it offered a clear aspirational arc. You start clearing rats out of a cellar, you end administering baronies and punching demigods. And it offered leveling up in much the same way as the game itself did. You progressed from basic to expert, to companion, to master, to immortals, mirroring the journey of your characters. For many European players in particular, this was D&D as a whole. It was also approachable. The step-by-step tutorial style made it much less intimidating than diving straight into AD&D. The catch is that hardly anyone actually played all the way up the ladder, and this became even less the case over time. By the time you reach the Companion, Master, Immortal tiers, you're in really a different game entirely to where you started, and most campaigns never got there. So a lot of this material never particularly got used. Meanwhile, the existence of this full D&D line alongside AD&D just deepened the brand fog and the rivalry between the two. It's like producing and supporting two editions of the same game at the same time. Two flavours of Dungeons & Dragons, neither of them being particularly the core line from an outside point of view. Advanced didn't seem to fit into the ladder. In 1989, TSR releases Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition, a cleaned up version of 1st Edition. Demons and devils get renamed as Tanari and Betezu. Assassins and half-orcs vanish from the core rules, and some of the edgier art and language is trimmed, partly in response to the 1980s satanic panic that tried to link D&D to suicide, occultism, and worse. Mechanically, 2nd Edition streamlines and reorganises a lot of the 1st Edition mess, even if it doesn't change the underlying engine as radically as later editions would. Culturally, it is the age of settings. Forgotten Realms, Dragonlance, Dark Sun, Planescape, Birthright, Al-Qadim, and more all bloom during this period. It's certainly rich creatively and experimentally for D&D. Fans loved this era for the sheer amount of creativity that was emerging from the company. Dark Sun's dying world aesthetic and sword and sorcery, Planescape's baroque metaphysics, Ravenloft's gothic horror, they all gave very different flavours of D&D under the same mechanical umbrella, which is where D&D kind of got outmanoeuvred by other games at the time. This time also set TSR on the road to ruin. Shannon Appelkline and Ben Riggs both note that flooding the market with so many different settings and supplements ended up cannibalizing TSR's own audience against itself. You weren't expanding your customer base, you were slicing it into thinner and thinner lines across more products. In 1995, TSR tried to refresh things with a black-bordered revised 2nd edition core set, updated arts, reorganization, but the underlying drift was overall the same. Too many books, increasingly unbalanced options, and a company hemorrhaging cash for reasons that had little to do with whether Thaco made any sense. The fall of TSR is a whole soap opera in and of itself, which it's foolish to try and cover in its entirety in a single YouTube video, especially given the attention spans of kids today. But some highlights matter for understanding why D&D's corporate guardians kept repeating the same mistakes, and at the heart of it really is the fact that we're talking about hobbyists and not business people. By the mid-90s, TSR is still making plenty of sales on paper, something like 40 million in 1995, but it is nonetheless chronically short of cash. A major reason is its bizarre distribution deal with Random House, under which Random House would advance TSR about 27.3% of the retail value of products as soon as TSR shipped them, not when they actually sold. Inside TSR, staff reportedly nicknamed Random House Banco de Random House because the company started shipping product not based on demand or the market, but based on the need for immediate advances to keep the whole thing going. Ben Riggs and others document how this masked which books were actually selling and encouraged chronic overprinting. TSR pumped out far too many novels and tried to push things like Dragon Dice hard into the mass market book trade. When those overprinted products didn't sell, Random House exercised its right to return unsold stock, including entire years' worth of unsold novels and crates upon crates of Dragon Dice, and demanded repayment. That return wave blew a hole in TSR's finances and left them unable to even pay their printers. Layered on top of that was the duplicate product strategy, 2 parallel D&D lines, Basic/BECMI and ad&d, a stack of competing settings, and a supplement treadmill that unbalanced the game while chasing short-term sales. Appelkline explicitly calls out how multiplying settings like Forgotten Realms, Planescape, Dark Sun, Birthright, and so on divided the audience instead of bringing it together and growing it. Lorraine Williams, who ran TSR from 1985 to 1997, sits at the centre of a lot of the problems of this era. She's become a pantomime villain in fan lore, but the historical record is slightly more nuanced. She steered TSR away from earlier collapse, oversaw its creative peak in settings, even if much of that was to mock her, and presided over the very decisions, overprinting, overextension, reliance on Random House advances, that did finally break it. The takeaway is less "Yah boo, you suck, Lorraine," and more "this company has never had a stable, realistic relationship with the size of its own market." And that's a theme that keeps recurring through multiple owners. By 1997, TSR cannot pay its printer. It can't reliably get core books into stores. It is functionally dead. Wizards of the Coast, flush with fat stacks from Magic the Gathering, buys TSR, its assets, and the D&D intellectual property, bringing many staff back and relocating the operation, and also beginning a rather aggressive expansion of buying up other RPG companies as well, often just to shutter them. Then, in 1999, Hasbro buys Wizards of the Coast, and with it, Dungeons & Dragons. Wizards continues as a subsidiary company, but from this point on, D&D is part of a toy and media conglomerate, and that colours everything that follows. In 2000, Wizards releases Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition, folding basic and advanced back into a single game. Mechanically, it's a huge overhaul. Ascending armor class, unified d20 system resolution, roll d20 plus modifiers against a difficulty class to succeed, consistent mechanics for saving throws, skills, and attacks. People embraced 3rd edition because it finally felt like something consistent. You could explain most of the game with roll a d20 and try to hit the number, instead of consulting 6 different subsystems, some percentile, some not, and so on. Skills, feats, and prestige classes promised unprecedented control over your character build. For a while, this felt like the grown-up, rational version of D&D that 1st edition and 2nd edition fans had always claimed existed in their heads, if left so on paper. They also discovered the dark side of system mastery. All that flexibility meant that you could produce fantastically broken builds if you knew what you were doing, and high-level play turned into a kind of multi-page spreadsheet exercise. Stat blocks got fatter, prep time ballooned, and combat bogged down into hour-long set pieces, most of which were arguments over the interactions of different feats, capabilities, powers, spells, and so on. It was elegant in the abstract, but a bit of a slog in practice. But 3rd edition also did something even bigger than rework the rules. It came with a license. Alongside 3rd edition, Wizards introduced the Open Game License, OGL, and the D20 System Trademark License. The OGL is a public copyright license that allows other publishers to reuse designated open game content, including most of the core rules, all bundled into a system reference document, the bare bones. At least that was the idea. You could use it so long as you followed the terms of the license, so everyone was now able to potentially tie their games to the big dog. The D20 System Trademark License, meanwhile, allowed you to slap a D20 system logo on products and to openly state compatibility, in exchange for agreeing to some additional constraints. The result was a massive explosion of third-party and hobbyist content, especially on the internet. IP lawyers and commentators routinely point to the OGL as a rare example of a big company opening up its rules, its material, in a way that encourages an entire ecosystem of spin-off games and supplements. The idea was that this would allow D&D to be supported by third parties, with adventures and some additional material, while Wizards could rake in the money by selling the core books and doing the important stuff that actually made them money. Didn't quite work out that way. The D20 boom that followed included everything from traditional fantasy adventures to superhero games like Mutants and Masterminds, original games not really being something that they'd anticipated when they opened up the OGL. There were espionage games like Spycraft. All of this weird stuff was built on the open D20 chassis, and people were churning out versions of their own in-house games that ran on the D20 engine, whether this was a good idea or not. This revolution also just happened to include an absolute tidal wave of forgettable shovelware, drivel, nonsense, and very low-level fan content, because, of course it does. When the market saturates and the novelty wears off, you get the inevitable D20 bust, but by then, the habit of building off D&D's rules had sunk in deep. Before we carry on with the additions, we need to take a little side path. We need to address a recurring theme: moral squeamishness. In the 1980s, D&D is the focus of a full-blown moral panic. Press and religious groups accuse it of promoting Satanism, or at least their idea of Satanism, suicide, witchcraft, and all the usual stuff. TSR's response, especially going into 2nd edition, includes cutting or renaming demons and devils, dropping assassins and half-orcs from the core books, and sanding off some of the edgier art. including, eventually, work like the topless succubus from the first edition monster manual that conservative critics loved to wave around as evidence of moral degeneracy. Move forward to the third edition OGL era, and the panic shifts from Satan to sex. In 2003, the Valor project announces the Book of Erotic Fantasy, a 190-page full-colour OGL supplement full of rules for sex, seduction, love, pregnancy, and related mechanics. And an honest, if perhaps culturally misguided, attempt. But what would I know? Wizards' reaction is to amend the D20 system trademark license with a new Community Standards of Decency clause. Shannon Appleclone and others document how this effectively prevents the Book of Erotic Fantasy from using the D20 logo. The book is eventually published under the OGL alone, dropping the official branding, not that it really makes any difference either way to anybody. But the pattern is at this point pretty straightforward. In the 1980s, TSR sacrifices demons and assassins on the altar of respectability. In the 2000s, Wizards sacrifices sex supplements to protect the brand. Fast forward to the 2010s and 2020s, and Hasbro basically panics and reacts to any accusation they can find and censors their product in reaction. In all of these cases, community standards turns out to mean please don't upset anyone who might write an angry letter. Oh no. Angry pros, run for the hills. Fast forward again and you see the same instinct from the opposite political direction. Content gets flattened, awkward topics disappear, settings are sanitized, artwork is memory hold, not because there's anything necessarily wrong with it, but because someone has imagined that there is something wrong with it. This is not because the game or the companies behind it have had some profound moral awakening, but just because edgy material is risky to a mass market brand, which D&D should never really have been. The target of these panics has changed, but the corporate reflex has not. In 2008, Wizards launches D&D 4th edition, and this is where the edition wars really go nuclear. 4th edition is laser focused on tactical combat, and miniatures, collectible ones, and battle mats, and it's trying to ape MMOs. Every class gets at-will encounter and daily powers, like clicking your little box at the bottom of World of Warcraft. Every class is also slotted into a defined role: defender, striker, controller, leader, language lifted almost directly from MMO design. If you like crunchy, well-signposted, teamwork-oriented fights, a skirmish on a gridded map, then 4th edition is superb at what it sets out to do. Former designers and reviewers alike have praised how easy it is to build balanced encounters and how consistently monsters function. However, most of the actual audience fucking hated it. To them, 4th edition felt more like World of Warcraft with dice than their own internal mental picture of D&D. The heavy emphasis on power cards, tactical positioning, and clearly scripted combat rotations left non-combat play feeling comparatively undercooked, despite the innovation of extended challenges. On top of that, Wizards replaced the more open OGL D20 ecosystem with a much more restrictive game system license, GSL, for 4th edition content, which many third-party publishers found unappealing, onerous, or outright hostile. That decision directly contributed to Paizo taking 3.5, filing the serial numbers off under the OGL, and releasing Pathfinder, which for a while actually outsold D&D and was essentially just a tidied up 3rd edition, continuity 3rd edition. So mechanically 4th edition is sharp and focused, but arguably it is not even a role-playing game. Strategically, it's another case of Wizards slamming a door it had previously flung open and then being surprised when people simply walk around the building. This was also the first time they tried to make D&D digital, and it was a dismal failure, albeit, tragically, not their fault. In 2010, Wizards tried to smooth things over a bit with D&D Essentials, a line of products intended as an easier on-ramp to 4th edition, including a new red box starter set deliberately echoing the 1983 Mensa Basic set. The Essentials line repackaged the 4th edition rules with streamlined classes and tutorial material. Reviewers at the time note the walkthrough, choose your own adventure style player book, and the way that the set is pitched clearly at newcomers. Some fans appreciated the attempt to make 4th edition less intimidating, others found it confusing. Was this 4.5? Was it a replacement, an optional variant? Wizards' communication didn't exactly help matters here. Essentials ended up as this sort of odd half-step, mechanically compatible with 4th edition, aesthetically reaching back to 80s nostalgia, and strategically signalling panic and a return to old eras. In 2014, after a lengthy public playtest, Wizards releases Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. The design pitch is the best of all worlds. Simpler mechanics, rulings not rules, but with enough crunch to still feel like D&D, bringing together the new school and the old school. Advantage/disadvantage streamlines a lot of numerical fiddling, bounded accuracy keeps bonuses small, and the core books nod towards both OSR-ish dungeon bashing and 3rd edition style character building, with plenty of options, albeit sanitized. Crucially, 5th edition lands right as tabletop role-playing explodes in visibility. Articles and industry reports point to double-digit sales growth over multiple years, boosted by actual play shows, Twitch and YouTube, the Critical Role phenomenon, and D&D cameos in things like Stranger Things. Things. By 2017 to 2018, Bloomberg and others are reporting huge year-on-year sales jumps, 41% in 2017, then another 52% in 2018, and tens of millions of players worldwide. Then COVID-19 hits, and instead of killing the hobby, it boosts it. Coverage from Game Daily, GeekWire and others notes that 2020 was D&D's best year ever, with play moving online via Roll20, Fantasy Grounds, D&D Beyond and others, and Wizards reporting this big revenue increase. Mechanically, 5th edition is good enough. It runs smoothly at low levels, it's forgiving for new players, and it doesn't collapse entirely, not entirely, at high level. So, it's pretty much there. It's not carefully balanced, encounter difficulty is more of a suggestion than a science, and a lot depends on Dungeon Master judgment. Culturally though, 5th edition is the point where D&D becomes a lifestyle brand. You can now buy D&D Converse shoes, D&D Lego sets, D&D Hawaiian shirts, D&D coffee, D&D cereal, and so on. Journalists have quite openly described Hasbro's aim as turning D&D into a Marvel-style 4-quadrant media property, with Hasbro executives calling it under-monetized and treating the game as a pipeline for films, cross-promotions, and merch. It's just a shame they're so bad at it. If your fantasy is to sit around a table with mates and roll dice, that's not what any of that additional cruft is about. Instead of creating a 6th edition, which probably would have been smarter, Wizards released a 2024 revision of 5th edition. New core books, still branded as 5th edition, fully compatible with 2014 material, at least according to the marketing. This despite being about 5 years overdue for a new edition. I think it was a compromise. Because post-COVID things had begun to decline, and that didn't make the spreadsheets look particularly good. But at the same time, D&D was still at the height of its popularity. This would be the best time to put out a new edition to sell more core books, which are the primary earners for any role-playing game. So I think it was inevitable we would get something, but what they chose to do didn't necessarily make a lot of sense to anybody outside of Wizards. The changes are broadly incremental. The word race is replaced with species, and ability score bonuses are moved to backgrounds. So a gnome and a half giant can have the same statistics. obviously. This is in line with broader inclusivity efforts from the preceding decade and earlier Tasha's era design. Backgrounds now carry ability score increases and an origin feat, giving them a bit more in the way of mechanical teeth. Weapon mastery is added as a system that gives martial characters more distinctive toys, letting them unlock per weapon properties. It still doesn't mean that fighters compete with the rest of the character types, but it's something. A sop. Unarmed strikes get folded more cleanly into grapples and shoves, some tool rules get clarified, and a scattering of monsters and spells are tweaked. It's very much a second print run with some notes in the margins, rather than a truly radical redesign, though it is better balanced. What made people angry about this was less the content and more the context surrounding it. In early 2023, news leaks and reporting revealed that Wizards had a plan to replace or deauthorize the OGL with a much more restrictive OGL 1.1, imposing royalties on larger creators and claiming broader rights over third-party content. Gizmodo's coverage details proposed royalty thresholds, one-sided license terms, and a Washington Post explainer underlines how unprecedented it seemed to be to try to retroactively revoke a perpetual license from 2000. The backlash was enormous. Tens of thousands of fans signed open letters. Big third-party publishers announced that they will not sign any new OGL terms, and companies like Paizo responded by announcing the Orc license, a system-neutral open license they intend to house in a non-profit and keep out of Wizards' control. Wizards eventually capitulates and retreats, leaving OGL 1 in place, and even releases the 5.1 SRD under the Creative Commons, an entirely different lineage of licensing. But the damage is done. Nobody trusts Wizards anymore, and they already pretty much didn't. When 2024 rolls out, everything from automatic rules updates on D&D Beyond to old spells being quietly rewritten is seen through the lens of how are they going to move the goalposts this time, or how are they going to fuck up my small business. Before we get to the ceremonial ass-kicking and curb-stomping, it's worth acknowledging what D&D actually did. It created the tabletop RPG industry as a thing. There were proto-RPG ideas floating around before, some Victorian parlour games, and Braunsteins, but D&D is the thing that hit critical mass and stuck, primarily infecting the public consciousness through the university system. It's given the wider culture ideas like the alignment grid, lawful, chaotic, good, evil, all intermingling along with neutral, and that has escaped containment into memehood, and now gets used to categorize everything, from fictional characters in popular series to sandwiches. It popularized the language of crits and botches, nat 20s and nat 1s, that come to mean catastrophe or superlative success. Through the OGL, it unintentionally created the conditions for a thriving third-party ecosystem, and took all of these secondary publishers and the PDF distribution systems that support them into the stratosphere. A lot of these games, this diaspora of games from D&D and its licenses, either clone D&D, refute it, react to it, or gleefully weaponize its entrails, but we all owe a debt to Dungeons & Dragons. You don't have to think that D&D is good at anything, or what you want from a game, to recognise that we all in one way or another are playing in its long shadow, and for that you have to tip your cap. The central heresy, I suppose, is this: D&D has never been especially good at anything, even the things that it was originally made to do. That's the bit that gets you defrocked in some circles. For all of its importance, which is genuine, D&D has never been especially good at pursuing any particular design agenda. As a simulation, it's always been a bit of a joke. Armor class, hit points, Vancian slots. These are not really modelling anything particularly, they're just stable abstractions that we've all agreed to not look at too closely or to manifestly ignore. And then as a narrative engine as well, it's incredibly half-hearted. It's only in the more recent editions that there has even been a nod to narrative framing of games. 5th edition might have Bond's ideals, flaws and inspiration, but it never really does that much with them. 2024 edition renames some of it heroic inspiration. None of it has the tight causal integration that you see in games actually designed to make story structure a mechanical priority. But then a lot of them overwhelm narrative with rules, so comme ci, comme ça. The incentive structure is still fundamentally fight monsters, take their stuff, and level up. What D&D does, and what it's always done, is that it provides a loosely coherent kit of parts that you can weld into whatever it is you actually want to do with it. It is DIY and punk rock, or at least it was, but that is not a particularly corporate agenda, and so therefore now it clashes with itself. It is the IKEA flat pack of RPGs. It's not the best furniture, but it fits in most rooms and everybody knows how to use an Allen key. The reason it's the default isn't because it's the pinnacle of simulation or narrative or tactical design, it's the default because it was the first, and really no other reason. It is continuously in print, it is the Kleenex of role-playing games, and it is backed by the biggest, loudest megaphone in the form of Hasbro. If there's one thing that D&D's many corporate parents have done consistently, it's reactive mismanagement. TSR responded to early success by overprinting novels and gimmick products like Dragon Dice, thinking that they could cash in on the magic boom, signing a terrible distribution deal with Random House, and proliferating so many settings and parallel rules lines that they sabotaged their own section of the market. Wizards responded to the success of the OGL by pulling the ladder up for 4th edition with the GSL, which helped create its own main competitor in Pathfinder and destroyed support for 4th edition. It responded to the Book of Erotic Fantasy by tightening trademark rules. It responded to 5th edition's enormous boom by trying to revoke or hobble the OGL, 20 odd years after the fact, detonating a trust bomb under the entire D&D ecosystem. D&D Beyond's handling of the 2024 update, automatic rules changes to spells and magic items, older versions being pushed into homebrew status, is just the latest expression of the instinct. Change everything first, explain it or put out fires later, and assume people will learn to like it once they've stopped screaming, which hasn't ever seemed to have worked out with D&D. None of this is new or surprising if you've watched the brand for any length of time. The pattern is always the same. Chase a short-term gain, ignore the long-term consequences, and then run a contrite PR tour once the audience starts setting things on fire. D&D needs to be happy that it is a consistent, evergreen product. When D&D launched, it was a DIY subculture. You had to know someone or haunt the right kind of shops. You had to photocopy house rules. You had to argue in fanzines. It felt underground, even when it technically wasn't. Now Hasbro's executives and Axios pieces talk about D&D as a lifestyle with tens of millions of global fans engaged not just in play, but through merch, media and digital tie-ins. The Guardian has already told Hasbro, politely for a newspaper, to stop trying to turn it into Marvel with orcs because that's not how the hobby works, showing a rare case of insight on the part of the Guardian. D&D's essence is people making things up in a room together, which is notoriously tricky to monetize, at least at Marvel Cinematic Universe levels. Art direction has tended to follow suit. Where early D&D oscillated between horrifyingly amateur and weirdly evocative, and 4th edition was at least gleefully over the top and kinetic, modern 5th edition and 2024 art tends towards a very safe concept art for a Netflix cartoon look that is virtually indistinguishable from AI, and in fact, sometimes is AI. It is competently painted, aggressively inoffensive, which makes it offensive, and rarely tells you much about how bizarre or dangerous or gritty the world is supposed to feel. That's not a factual claim, it's just the impression of someone who's seen the weirder stuff and misses when the monsters look like something scrawled on a schoolbook margin by a teenager with severe issues. Mechanically and aesthetically, D&D Fantasy is now its own genre. It's not really recognisable as anything related to Howard, Lieber, Moorcock, or even Tolkien anymore. It's closer to what people think fantasy looks like after 40 years of D&D, which is fine, but it does mean that assuming D&D is generic fantasy is kinda backwards. D&D is now generic only in the sense that McDonald's is generic. It's everywhere, and everything else has to define itself in relation to it, at least to an extent. The pandemic could have been D&D's moment to become the benevolent centre of the hobby. Reports from 2021 make it clear that 2020 was the best year ever for D&D in sales, with Wizards claiming over 50 million people had played the game and multiple years of consecutive growth. Online platforms like Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds saw major upticks in usage. Wizards and Hasbro could have doubled down on openness, a stable OGL, supportive relationships with other VTTs, investment in weird, ambitious books that took advantage of a huge, engaged audience. Instead, they decided that the problem with making record profits was that they weren't making enough record profits, and set about trying to close off the very license that had helped entrench D&D's dominance, allowing for this COVID bounce. The OGL 1.1 fiasco becomes the defining story of D&D's 50th anniversary era, rather than anything actually positive or anything actually in the 2024 rulebooks. It's a bit like being handed the keys to a classic pub during a storm and deciding the smart play is to put coin locks on the toilets. Here's the bit of good news for the rest of us. Every time D&D has a bit of a stumble, when it falls and it can't get up, the rest of the hobby benefits. TSR's implosion helped open the field to things like Vampire the Masquerade in the 90s, 4th edition's perceived and actual missteps, and licensing clampdown fueled the rise of Pathfinder and revived interest in older editions via the OSR. The OGL 1.1 mess has pushed a lot of people to finally try non-D&D games, and it has catalysed moves towards independent open licenses, like the Orc. On top of that, the player base has aged. Many people who discovered D&D in the 80s and 90s now have adult incomes, and are quite happy to splash out on boutique, beautifully produced games, game tables, game rooms, game everything. The sort of strange specific projects that would have never survived in TSR's monoculture. Economists of the hobby, like Graham Davis, have pointed out that smaller, better targeted games can thrive precisely because the audience is older and more willing to pay for something that actually suits their tastes. So every time D&D's stewards set themselves on fire for fun, some chunk of the audience realises that they don't have to live in their house anymore, and don't have to catch fire as well, and so they wander off to find somewhere more comfortable, more cosy, better suited to their temperament. That is not great for Hasbro's quarterly targets, but it's very healthy for the wider hobby. And as the millennials and Gen Z start to age out of D&D or emerge from the cocoon of the COVID bubble, the rest of us are likely to profit. After all this poking and prodding, weighing of organs, rooting around in viscera, what can we say about Dungeons & Dragons that isn't just edition war grumbling? D&D will always be first. You can't take that away from it. It's the thing that proved that you could sell pretend with rules as a product. Everything else we do, whether we're following in its footsteps or contemptuously marching in the other direction, is happening because of those 3 little booklets in 1974. It has never been the pinnacle of anything in particular, not simulation, not narrative structure, not tactical design. What it does is sit in the middle, acceptably, and let people hang their own priorities off it and bash it into shape with a hammer. Its history is, almost without exception, a string of reactive management decisions. TSR invents the industry and then nearly kills itself with overprinting and too many game lines. Wizards opens the rules within the OGL and then regrets it when someone writes a sex book. Hasbro presides over the most commercially successful edition and then still tries to squeeze even harder until the goodwill pops like an overripe beholder. D&D is no longer a weird little hobby for weird little guys like me. It is a cutesy, nerdy lifestyle brand with shoe deals, Lego crossovers, Hawaiian shirts, and if someone can get the licensing to clear, probably D20-shaped sex toys at some point. In fact, there already are plenty of fantasy dildos and sex toys with a more generic RPG flavour. Its art and default tone have become broadly safe, boring, broadly inclusive, boring, and broadly bland. Where older books sometimes look like they were illustrated by people having a nervous episode, or maybe we should call the police before they shoot up the place, modern D&D art looks like a Netflix pitch deck, which is, one suspects, the point. The pandemic handed Wizards an unprecedented opportunity, a massive influx of new players, a surge of nostalgia, and a captive audience playing online. They managed to parlay that into a licensing crisis so severe that even people who'd never read the OGL suddenly had opinions about contract law. It's an impressive sort of own goal if you admire that sort of thing. The broader RPG industry, meanwhile, is still afflicted with many of the same structural problems: shoestring budgets, part-time designers, executives flown in from other sectors who think our audience is everyone is a strategy and not a warning sign. All of this. D&D's problems are just those problems, writ large and branded with a dragon. D&D will go on. There will be a 2034 something edition and a 2044 golden anniversary deluxe slipcase. And every time they will insist that it's better, more inclusive, more streamlined, and more whatever the marketing adjective of the decade is. Extreme! The brand is too valuable not to keep rolling, and too beloved not for someone to pick it up. What it can't be again is what it was, that raw, slightly shambolic invitation to simply make things up together with your friends and write your own rules in the margins. We live in a world where there are more published RPGs than you can reasonably read, let alone play, in a lifetime. That plurality, all of those tiny, strange little games, exists in large part because of Dungeons & Dragons, either through the OGL or through people getting fed up and doing it themselves. So no, D&D isn't the best game, it's not the purest expression of anything, it's a compromised, mutating, frequently mismanaged beast that was still somehow given all of us an enormous amount. We don't have to worship it, we don't have to play it, but if we're honest, we should probably buy it a drink, nod politely as it rambles incoherently in the corner, and say, yeah, you were first, my dude. You don't have to be everything to everyone, and you're probably better off not even trying to be. Zang.
Hi, I'm Skip Breakfast, and you're watching Newsload. We're getting reports of a new card game which purports to make fun of the political and social hellscape in which we find ourselves, somehow turning this into a fun pastime for groups of slightly drunken friends to try and outdo each other. But there's one important question on everyone's lips: just how exactly do you play?